Okay, so we will start the second part of this lecture with material engineering. So the step is to find a way to properly organize microscopic units in order to optimize the second order nonlinear response at the macroscopic scale. So, in fact, the talk will be organized as follows. That's the outline will be less detailed. Then we start with material engineering and to find the way how to obtain the best crystals and eventually nanocrystals. Then using micro and nanophotonics, especially to explore the nonlinearities of nanocrystals. That's only to give you the view of a novel tool to explore individual objects. Then we will go to controlled polymer orientation instead of having spontaneous organization using electric field, polling, and also optical fields, which is relatively less developed domain. And if we have time, we will give some example of electro-optic device applications for polymers and maybe nanoplasmonics if really we have time before dinner. So, in fact, material engineering will start from second-order nonlinear optical molecules. We have seen this morning all possible architecture for quadratic nonlinear optical molecules. There can be also some stage for supramolecular organization with objects which remain in the nanoscale, such as dendrimers. Dendrimers are kind of polymers, but with very well-defined molecular mass because it's built up from multifunctional molecules, and on each function you can attach one more molecule and so on. So it's kind of like a flower or like a tree, hence there's the name of dendrimer, which means tree. Nanoparticles, we give a few examples about organic crystals and hybrid structure, and macroscopic will be single crystals and organization in polymers. So first, starting with crystals, that was the most natural idea to search for optimized crystals, but we leave the initiative to nature. And a lot of people have tried to find some rationale to improve the probability of non-centrosymmetric organization in crystals. But we will see that it is rather tricky and relatively random process. So first, I will give you some examples of famous inorganic crystals. So it's very old systems, such as the potassium hydrogenophosphate, KDP. This can be the hydrogen can also be replaced by deuterium, so KD star P, and in that case, this is a more transparent system. You can replace the potassium ion by ammonium ion. Anyway, the nonlinearities are relatively very small, but they have a very wide transparency range and phase matching possible over a very wide transparency range too. And they are interesting for UV and visible sources. But one of the main advantage, especially for KDP, is the possibility to grow huge crystalline samples, which can be used, for example, for high efficiency frequency doubling of high power laser. The interest of having this big structure is to allow for having a laser beam, very powerful laser beam with a very large diameter, then allowing transformation into harmonics with relatively good efficiency. This is the crystalline structure. These big atoms are potassium ions, and this is substituted by phosphorus and oxygen, phosphorus here and oxygen. But we will see some other structure. Another interesting compound, which is most developed for electro-optic, is lithium niobate. Lithium niobate are made of alternation of lithium. You have a layer of lithium with 3 oxygen. Then you have niobium with 6 oxygen in a tetrahedron. And you have this regular alternation between this structure. The lithium niobate has 2 possible phases, paraelectric phase, non-polar, but at high temperature. And you can see here that the atoms, lithium and niobium, are still in the center of their respective oxygen environment. But in room temperature, they are ferroelectric, and there is the displacement of these ions along a given axis, which provides some polar response. And you can see here a better representation, where here are the oxygen planes, here the position of ions, niobium and lithium, and in the ferroelectric phase that you will see the dissymmetry of the position of these cations with respect to the anionic layers of oxygen. And this results in a permanent dipole moment, a ferroelectric system. And another interesting property of lithium niobate is also the fact that it is photorefractive. You can induce some carriers by light, and due to electrooptic effect, you can create some lattice of refractive index pattern in the material. So other families are perovskite, titanium, barium titanate. It's mainly a photorefractive system. It's exactly the same philosophy here. Some titanates, you have a possibility to move the central titanium atom from the center of symmetry of the octahedron made of oxygen, and then it also induces a permanent dipole moment. This is the result here, and the displacement is relatively strong for titanate. Is about almost can reach 10% of the titanium oxygen bond length, which is relatively important. So, and these crystals form a set of domains because ferroelectricity, it's very strong dipole moments for small domains, and they have tendency, as any set of dipoles, to align in a random fashion. And if we don't do anything to the crystal, this results in random dipole orientation. In this case, dipole are not dipole of molecules. They are neither dipole of atomic units or atomic sets. It's a dipole of small domains, which are a dimension of few tens of micrometers, which tend to organize as a random manner. So it's necessary to apply an electric field in order to orient all domains in the parallel direction. And this dipole tends to be frozen in at room temperature, so the principle will be to apply a field at a higher temperature, and we will see the method also later on for nonlinear molecules in polymers. And this results in a strongly nonlinear structure. So, to show you how to proceed, you apply a Pauling voltage at moderate temperature, but higher than room temperature, 140, 150. And then wait a moment and cool down, and you keep the voltage on until it reaches the room temperature. And at room temperature, all domains are organized in parallel, and resulting in a strong macroscopic dipole moment and very good nonlinear response. We will see again this process in polymers. So the physics is the same. Another example is potonium titanyl phosphate, which is made of chains of titanium oxide octahedra mixed with tetrahedra of phosphate, and this is potassium ions. This is a relatively efficient material and relatively versatile. It means that you can place some material engineering even in this inorganic structure. For example, you can replace potassium ions by rubidium. It's the same family in the periodic table, but below. You can play the same. Play the same with between phosphorus and arsenic. For arsenic is below phosphorus in the periodic table, and you can have arseniate instead of phosphate. And this gives a lot of possibility. The interest is a wide transparency range, relatively high nonlinear response, and a strong angular and spectral acceptance for phase matching. So it's now widely used for frequency doublers and frequency doubling in waveguide in the form of a quasi-phase matching organization. And I think you have heard about this phase matching before. Important criterion to be discussed is the problem of optical damage, because as you have seen already this morning, the problem is really crucial. And this damage threshold is a multi-parameter problem, such as crystal quality, properties of pulse laser, profile of the beam, but also the quality of the crystal surface, repetition rates, number of pulse, environment, coating. And the damage can be in surface due to defect on impurities. So it's relatively it's not too difficult to solve if you may also protect the surface. The volume damage can also be induced by nonlinear effects, such as self-focusing, induced nonlinear absorption, or Raman scattering, all this effect being a third-order nonlinear effect. So it's important to keep in mind that we must take care about this effect. So from a general point of view, how to select a crystal for nonlinear optics? Then, for example, taking the example of parametric nonlinear response here, this can be the efficiency is proportional to the input power density, the effective nonlinear parameter you have seen in the lecture by Benoît Boulanger, that this can be calculated in each set of polarizations for omega and 2 omega, and the interaction length. So this effective coupling parameter is limited by the symmetry of the crystal and its nature. You have the crystal length, which can be limited by the walk-off due to birefringence, and the group velocity mismatch. I think you have seen these problems quite often in the previous lectures. The input power density, that is limited by damage and nonlinear effects, third-order effects. And this mismatch depends on the interaction configuration. As you know, you have to search for perfectly phase match materials. So optical parameters, also parameters limiting the efficiency, is acceptance. And depending on the duration of pulse and configuration, you may need angular acceptance. And in order to accommodate frequency conversion of non-parallel beams, and having a wide angular acceptance allows for phase matching conditions for converging beam. But you have also, we have also seen it this morning, the problem of spectral acceptance for ultra-short pulses. You must have, for a given incidence angle, the phase matching should accept, phase matching condition should be filled for a wide choice of wavelengths, and then should allow for a conversion of ultra-short pulses. So the walk-off is related to birefringent and is met for type 1 phase matching. And group velocity mismatch is limits the overlap among short pulses. So you have seen all these notions previously, so you can see that this, depending on the kind of application, depending on the source, then you must focus on some of these requirements. So now let's go really to more central topic, is how to come from beta, from a nonlinear response at the molecular level, to a macroscopic response, Chi2. And for example, if you have a system made of organic molecules, usually organic crystals are supposed to be molecular crystals. It means that the intermolecular interactions are much lower, much weaker energy than the energy responsible for the cohesion of molecules. And in such cases, we may consider, as the first hypothesis, that we consider that molecules, when packed together in the crystal, do not exert significant electronic perturbation on the other ones. Of course, it's a relatively rough approximation, but this model has been shown to work more or less for a wide choice of molecular crystals. So the additivity of hyperpolarizability, when considering S molecules per unit cell, can be calculated, can be applied to the expression of Chi2. So if you have correctly listened to Benoît Boulanger talk, he has also indicated how to the general rules for going from microscopic to macroscopic. This is a slightly different way to express, but it's the same physics. Then, of course, you must take into account the so-called local field factors, which really reflect the fact that with respect to external optical fields, molecules inside the crystal do not see this external field exactly because this field is screened by material. So this is the origin of local field factor here. And the most important point is the description of Chi2 as a function of a sum of the contribution of each beta components ponderated by the projection between microscopic and macroscopic axis, direct cosine director, which is the product of this axis. The capital YGK being the axis of the crystal, the small YGK corresponding to the molecules, axis of the molecule. So we can express this, in fact, the calculation of this term can be more or less difficult. We shall see in the following a relatively simple example. And it's really related to the fact that you have to calculate, in fact, the projection of the omega into omega electric field on the main molecular axis of the molecule, which is responsible for the nonlinear response. And this term can be only expressed. We can write it as the form of B. And B, this B factor, which is simply this product. I'm sorry, I kept the mistake here, the error. This B factor gives the intrinsic crystalline nonlinear efficiency to optimize Chi2. That is independent on the nature of the molecule and is independent of local field factor. This is really a signature of the nonlinear performance of a crystal. And this is an example for a monoclinic crystal. You have seen in Benoît Boulanger talk that this B factor, or the equivalent, depends on the symmetry of the molecule, of the crystal, and we expect that the B factor is maximal for the lowest symmetry crystalline structure. So here it's only an example to illustrate the way to calculate B in a particular case. We will focus on monoclinic group 2 crystal, and this is a two-fold symmetry axis, it's a vertical one, which is considered as a capital Y macroscopic axis. We consider a structure where this crystal contains two molecules with related to each other by this two-fold symmetry here. And this molecule make an angle, which is named theta, with respect to the vertical axis. That's the first point. We know about the crystalline structure. Second, we want to optimize one particular coefficient of the material, and we choose the coefficient YXX, which corresponds to second harmonic generation, type 1 phase matching, between horizontally polarized fundamental field along the x-axis. And you recognize here you have two indices corresponding to E omega multiplied by E omega. And we want to measure the second harmonic along this vertical polarization corresponding to P2 omega polarized along the y-axis here. So, and to calculate the chi2, we have to consider the projection of this axis along the molecular axis itself. And here you can see that E omega projection factor is sinus theta. So we have to count E omega 2 times because it's a quadratic process, so sinus square theta. And the harmonic polarization projects on beta along this angle cosinus theta. And then you have this factor. The B factor is square sinus square theta cosinus theta. And we can calculate the maximum of this function. And this function is found to be maximum for 54 degrees, a so-called magical angle, which can be found in other physical process depending on this function. And this is a way to identify, to find out the crystalline structure which can give rise to maximum chi2 values for a particular electric field configurations. And we have been fortunate. A crystalline self-organization process seems to be relatively kind of gambling. And there was some good results for that. And one of typical example was this molecule. And there is a weak probability of acentric crystallization. But this was the case with this molecule. And why to choose this molecule? Remind you the lecture this morning. We have a strong donor group, nitrogen with a non-bonding electron pair, a strong acceptor nitro. And the molecule display permanent dipole moment in this direction because the electron has been transferred to nitro. That's this orientation. And I highlight the OH group in this part because it's interesting. We shall see. And we have to notice, for people who are more familiar with chemistry, that this carbon has 4 different substituents. Hydrogen, which is not represented, this bond, and this bond, which are different. It means that the carbon is so-called asymmetric carbon, which is not identical to its image in the mirror. And in crystallography, it is well known that any molecule having an asymmetric carbon crystallizes in a non-centrosymmetric system. So that, and this procedure was widely very popular in the beginning of nonlinear optics. So people used to synthesize a lot of of molecules having asymmetric carbons. And the results were relatively disappointing in general. Why is it disappointing? Because when you have to organize a nonlinear molecule, these molecules are made of 2 parts. This is, for example, donor-acceptor groups with their dipoles. This is the nonlinear part. And here you have an asymmetric carbon, where the best position could be there, for example. And the problem is that along this axis between the donor and this carbon, there is a completely free rotation and movement. And you may imagine to have a non-centrosymmetric organization around the asymmetric carbon, but with a quasi-centrosymmetric organization of the nonlinear molecule itself. You can see that I have this dipole along the direction. This dipole here. This, in this domain, this is acentric, but the real nonlinear part can remain almost antiparallel. So this solution is not fully relevant, and people have been obliged to search for other tricks. And another trick was to put some relatively bulky group in order to prevent from this organization. But here, the best point was to add an OH group. OH group is the same group as in water. And you know that in water you have hydrogen bonding. which is an intermolecular bond which displays a relatively high energy as compared to dipole-dipole interactions. And if you are lucky, this hydrogen bond can be associated, for example, to nitro group or other molecules, and may induce an organization which compensates the antiparallel dipole alignment. And it was exactly what was found with this molecule. So the result is following. This is the molecule here. That's a scheme. So you recognize the 2 NPP molecule. This is the two-fold axis. And here we searched for the same configuration as before with the Chi2 ZXX. And then the angle was found to be 58 degrees instead of 54 for the optimized structure. So it's very close to the optimized organization. And for this reason, the nonlinear response was really quite high. So you see here's the average orientation, dipole orientation with respect to the two-fold axis. And as a result, it was possible to fabricate nanosecond optical parametric oscillators with NPP and with low oscillation threshold and relatively wide tunability. So this is the crystal, and it's pumped at 590 nanometers, and is relatively successful work. It was not further developed for a stupid reason, but unfortunately difficult to overcome. It's very difficult to grow single crystals with relatively correct, suitable dimension and without defect. And the attempts have been made very seriously because a French company, developed this crystal growth, but it's really a challenge. And this is also the problem with organic crystals. I told you these are molecular crystals, so the intermolecular interaction has poor energy, and as a consequence, the crystals are not very hard and difficult to grow. They have a lot of defects, and only a few of them, which I see an example just after, can have good quality for really practical applications at the commercial level. So this crystal has been used for years, but only as one single example in former Bell Laboratories in a femtosecond laboratory to perform second harmonic generation in femtosecond pulses, because in some phase matching configuration of NPP display a very wide wavelength acceptance compatible with short pulse interactions. Another strategy was developed, especially in Zurich, in ETH in Zurich, to develop ionic crystals. The point is that, okay, that's very difficult to make good crystals with molecular materials, so why not to go to use some ionic crystals with individual ionic molecules, but organic ionic molecules. So this was the principle of this object, which is named stilbalzolium. Stilbene is the group of these two rings with the double bonds, and oleum because of this positive nitrogen here, and this strong donor here. Of course, a counter ion should be found. So this is so-called tosylate ions, methyl and SO3. And so the problem is that the contrast is not good, but in original picture, you are supposed to see very clearly here the pattern below, and the quality is this dimension, 1 centimeter, 2 square centimeter, is 2/2, is relatively good, much better than the other organic materials. The crystalline structure is not optimized for second harmonic generation, and you can see from the colors that if we want to have second harmonic generation, it will be limited to red and infrared. But molecules are almost relatively parallel to each other. The angle between molecular planes is only 20 degrees. And the highest nonlinear susceptibility is the diagonal Chi2, which cannot accommodate permit for phase matching, but can be used for electro-optic applications. And then you can see that you have a huge nonlinearity, 10 times higher than for NPP at wavelengths corresponding to telecommunications. And for this reason, this is used as electro-optic material. The performance of the crystal is due to the fact that, in fact, this coefficient Chi2 can be related to individual beta value by a factor of cosinus cubic cosinus theta, which is almost maximum. So it's used as an electro-optic material. And one application is in the domain of optical rectification. You have seen this difference frequency mixing between two waves of very close frequencies, and the result is a terahertz wave. And the problem for most material is you need some relatively wide band, and here this is the widest terahertz range which has been available. There is an example of another organic crystal, more recent, but with the cutoff is around 20 terahertz instead of 30. And this is, of course, it's made with femtosecond with ultra-short pulse because it requires a very high intensity. And to compare with classical photoconducting switches, that's you have a wide extension of this emission range. So the problem which you will find with dust as compared to polymers is that it's still a crystal, and it's very good, but it's difficult to make a waveguide structure. It has been made, but it's not trivial, and it's difficult to make some integration on other circuit or other device because crystals cannot grow in on any kind of substrate with a controlled manner. And this reasons why this dust is mainly limited to the domain of terahertz emission, which is already a quite good achievement. So that's an example of macroscopic crystals, but it's maybe interesting to see how to perform self-organization at a smaller scales, because sometimes the organization looks to be easier. So there is a two-dimensional type of self-organization by using a surface. A surface, an interface, is non-centrosymmetric as a definition. So if you are able to deposit the monolayers, then you create non-centrosymmetric nanoscale layers. And this has been found a long time ago in Langmuir-Blodgett layers, where Langmuir and Blodgett found a way to transfer Langmuir layers of amphiphilic molecules at the interface between water and air onto a hydrophilic substrate. When pulling the substrate from water to outside, molecules have a tendency to aggregate on the hydrophilic surface, and you can fabricate non-centrosymmetric layers. After that, there is possible engineering to make multi-layers by alternating the nature of the molecules, and you can have thin films with non-centrosymmetric organization. The problem with this layer is that the cohesion is still governed by van der Waals interactions with low energy, and they are not very stable. Catherine Blodgett has been able to make anti-reflection glasses, but they were very easily scratched and were not really suitable for practical applications. Self-assembled layers are more stable because the principle is made on a chemical reaction between atoms on a surface. For example, you may start from silicon or silica and perform a reaction with some reactive molecule here. And you can do it with silicon derivative, you can do it with sulfur derivative on gold, and so on. And you may have this kind of self-assembled layers at the two-dimensional scale. Another example I have already shown at the beginning, but this is another example. This is the dendrimer, but here the dendrimer is not made of dipolar molecules, but octupolar ones, and they are connected. In fact, it looks as independent molecules, but the independent part are only the blue counterions, but all these black systems, which are relatively big, are connected to each other by octupolar connected here in pink. So, and it has been shown that octupoles are fully ordered in this structure, exactly like on the dendrimer I shown in the first slide, where you have kind of growing like a tree and we have a dipolar alignment. Here you have octupolar organization. But this remains relatively very small structure and also not very easy to control in that scale. I give you an example of self-organization. This is one of a successful realization on nanoparticles. So the point was to start with a molecule very similar to dust. This called DASOP. This is synthesis method, and this molecule is inserted in in multi-layered system, kind of clays, were made of inorganic structure, manganese and phosphorus sulfide. These materials are magnetic, and some chemists have been able to show that it's possible to infiltrate these organic molecules between the layers. And what is found, that it is found that all molecules are parallel to each other within each plane and from one plane to another one, because you could have a situation, you have parallel molecule in one plane, but if you are not lucky, the next plane will have molecules in the opposite direction. But it's not the case. Everything is parallel, and the high nonlinear response was found a long time ago. But the point was to make sure that molecules are really organized like that and are really organized in a parallel architecture in order to lead to this very high nonlinear response. And for that, in order to make sure that molecules are oriented in a parallel manner, we had to use nonlinear optics, and we had to use the beta response, not only of each molecule, but also on each nanoparticle, using the harmonic light scattering experiment I showed you this morning, which can perform second harmonic generation in a coherent way in solution. It's possible to try also to insert in a polymer matrix, because they are very small molecules, so low scattering, and expect to have electric field orientation. So the first point was to check the parallelism of molecules in a nanoscale. So these particles have been synthesized. You have seen the reaction before. This is a transmission electron microscopy image of these particles. And it was found that they have approximately these shapes, cylinders. And from the size, average size of these molecules, and people know approximately the concentration of nonlinear molecules in the inorganic matrix. Then the number of active molecules is around between 600 and 3,000 molecules per particle. The size of the particle is not unique, and there is some dispersion of size. So how to prove the acentric ordering of this individual molecule in particles, so making harmonic light scattering? Because we can show that in disordered centrosymmetric systems, the beta of the particle will be proportional to the square root of the total number of active molecules. Because, in fact, you have seen this morning that the harmonic intensity of a disordered set of molecules in solution is proportional to the number of molecules, the concentration of molecule, and the square of beta. So you can imagine that if you measure the nonlinear response of this object, if molecules are disordered, this object will be the same thing as as the measurement cell in macroscopic scale. It means that the signal from this object will be proportional to the number of molecules per volume unit. And because the signal is proportional to the square to beta 2, then beta will be square root of this. On the contrary, if you have optimized acentric organization, we can consider that the beta value of this supramolecular object is the sum, a vectorial sum, of all individual molecules, and then beta is really proportional to the number of molecules in the object. So harmonic scattering will provide us beta values, and then from this beta value we will induce the total number of molecules. So the single dose of molecule has been measured, so this is the beta value. And the average value per nanoparticle in chloroform solution was found to have this value. It's quite large. And when taking this value and this value, making the ratios, and we find a possible number of particles which exactly relatively in the same range as for the number of molecules we had found for estimation of the size of the particles. So it's the same order of magnitude. And if we had a centrosymmetric organization, we would need a much larger number of active molecules in the nanoparticle to get the same beta of the nanoparticle. So it's not realistic. So it's interesting to see that a relatively simple nonlinear optical setup gives us relatively reliable information about the organization of molecules in the nanoscale. And we wanted to make sure of this result by checking, by a completely independent method, a second harmonic generation from a single crystalline object. This is now a widely used technique using multiphoton microscopy and to make micro and nanocrystal analysis. So the general method is to use two-photon-induced fluorescence, but mainly second harmonic generation. And the setup should show some spatial, but mainly spectral and polarization analysis in order to be sure that the object is a single crystalline, that the object is really emits second harmonic generation, and polarization analysis will tell us about the symmetry of the particle. So the setup is the following. That we start from the sample, in fact, but the sample is irradiated by a titanium sapphire femtosecond laser with a microscope objective, and the emitted signal, second harmonic, is collected backwards, but it could be forwards in some cases. And we can make a spectral analysis in order to make sure that we have a narrow band second harmonic signal instead of a wide band fluorescent signal. And there is polarization analysis using a polarizing beam splitter to analyze the polarization of the signal. And in that case, it's possible to explore various kinds of crystals. In our case, then there are some signal of particles. You can see that it's possible to discriminate because between the second harmonic and fluorescent signal. And here in this set of various particles, we have to select the particles which are single crystalline. And we suppose that these particles made of parallel dipolar molecules should display a dipolar response. And the signature of dipolar response is a polarization analysis where one polarization displays a much larger signal than the perpendicular one. That's obvious. And then you have this point by second harmonic and confirmed by two-photon fluorescence. On the contrary, other particles display a much more symmetrical pattern between these two different polarizations, and it can be shown that is a signature of a polycrystalline object. So focusing on this single crystalline object, then an example of analysis of one particle. this one, small one, this really shows a strongly dipolar character of the response. And by comparing to standard nonlinear materials, the beta value has been compared to the nonlinear materials, and the result is a beta which is the same order of magnitude as the beta found by harmonic light scattering. So we can find that using two completely different methods, we find the same information about nanoparticles. But this method is designed for single object, but its setup is more difficult to implement than for harmonic light scattering. So it shows that harmonic light scattering is really a powerful tool with relatively simple setup to characterize nonlinear objects and their symmetry properties and their order factor. So the dipolar orientation has been found to be powerful. But if we have to wait for spontaneous orientation, spontaneous organization, then we have seen that the probability to have optimized crystal is very low. In fact, during the period when chemists synthesized dozens and maybe hundreds of chemicals, and they were tested on the laser source, and only maybe 10% displayed some second harmonic signal, and among the 10%, maybe another 10% were found to be really interesting. So it was a great waste of time and energy, especially from the chemist. And this, in fact, this was so difficult that we wanted to find other solutions. The first one is to use the interesting octupolar molecules make they have no dipole moment. So, and taking, for example, an in-plane organization, you may represent a planar octupolar molecule by 3 electron donor arms, 3 electron acceptor arms, this here. Then we can find very easily that in the plane, the optimized organization is trigonal, threefold symmetry, where there are some attraction between the donor group here and the acceptor group here. And in that case, you find a trigonal optimized structure. On the contrary, if there is some attraction between groups of the same nature, donor and acceptor, you have an hexagonal organization which is centrosymmetric. So it's relatively easy to have good attraction between donor and acceptor because usually they have opposite signs. But the point will be to find the way to have interplane organization because crystals are three-dimensional objects. The optimized configuration will be eclipsed system where you have superimposition of groups of the same nature, two donor groups, and acceptors. And if you have a fully eclipsed system with a 60 degrees tilt, then you have superimposition of donor group on the top and acceptor group on the bottom, and so on. And this means that to have the non-centrosymmetry along the third axis, the interplane interaction favor donor-donor and acceptor-acceptor interaction. So if you have favorable in-plane interactions to trigger non-centrosymmetric ordering here, this interaction will be detrimental to interplane interactions. So you have a problem to be sure that you get a proper non-centrosymmetric system. And in fact, explorations of octupolar systems were not as successful as expected. But there is an exception, which is in the domain of inorganic system. It's BBO. BBO is a almost perfectly organized two-dimensional, three-dimensional octupolar structure. This is a projection of the average plane of these entities. The individual entity is this beta borate. This is alternation of boron and oxygen atom. So boron are small atoms, oxygen are bigger. And you can see that in the plane, this oxygen these boron-oxygen bonds are more negatively charged than this part. So you have here these bonds point along the complementary atom here. So you can see clearly this trigonal symmetry in the plane. So it looks perfect in plane. And you can see also from the third dimension, because it's superimposition of several molecules, that molecules are almost eclipsed. So it's almost a perfect organization, both in plane and out of plane. That is quite exceptional. For this reason, some barium beta borate has been found to be very interesting, moderate nonlinear coefficients, but wide transparency. And now they are very widely used as parametric oscillators, as pumped in the visible or UV. And so a lot of presentations speaking about nonlinear optical tools, you have seen parametric oscillators made of these nonlinear crystals. Okay, so you can see that crystalline engineering is kind of gambling. So I must point out that is not gambling, is only the sign of our ignorance and our poor ability to predict quantitatively the probability of crystallizing in non-centrosymmetric from the molecular structure, because we don't devote enough brain or enough calculation media techniques in order to obtain relatively reliable prediction of asymmetric ordering in crystals. I think it could be possible. So when we speak about gambling, it's only because we don't know exactly. We are not mastering the organization rules of these crystals. So another reason to not to focus too much on crystals is that when going, especially for integrated optics, wave-guided optics, the crystalline technology is more difficult. Of course, it's developed in the domain of semiconductors. But what we want here is to associate, to make a hybrid architecture, associating some semiconductor devices such as laser sources or detectors, and highly efficient materials for light processing, such as electro-optic modulation, for example. And this, we shall see that it's possible to make very good materials with molecular systems. So for that, we want to control orientation by external fields. And first, electric field Pauling is a more natural method, the easiest way to proceed using dipolar molecules. So the basic process is to have a permanent field dipole interaction, and it can be performed either by pooling the material between two electrodes, or if you don't want to deposit electrode at the first stage, to apply an electric field by a high voltage needle. And the field here at the tip is very high, and it ionizes the atmosphere and creates some layer of charged species on the top of the polymer layer, and the substrate counter the sign is opposite, and it induces a strong electric field inside the layer. And electrode pooling is also possible between these two electrodes, but in in each case, then you will apply a similar procedure which is similar to that used for ferroelectric crystal pooling. We start at the room temperature, and the polymer must be transparent. It must change but be softened at a higher temperature to come to a state which comes closer to the liquid state. It's not fully liquid, but the matrix is not more rigid and allow for movement of molecules in the matrix. So we heat the polymer and apply a permanent electric field. And the correct temperature for allowing molecules to move is so-called the glass transition temperature. And for most of optical polymers, it's about between 100 and 200 degrees, which is important because we must find a temperature which will not transform or degrade or destroy the nonlinear molecules inside. So then, after waiting some time, a few minutes or maybe 1 hour, then we consider that we have organized and pulled the maximum of molecules, and we cool down when keeping the field on, and we can remove the field at the end of the process at room temperature. So then the statistic orientation of the dipole by a DC electric field is based on the energy of coupling between dipole and electric field, which is proportional to the projection factor, average projection factor of between these two dipoles. And we have to consider a Boltzmann distribution, which is related to the ratio with this coupling energy and KT. So in this case, we can calculate the average value of the macroscopic dipole induced by Pauling, but we have to calculate the special average value of cosinus theta. This is the processus, so you have to make a special average by taking cosinus theta, ponderating by the probability of orientation with respect to theta, and integrate on the all special orientations. And we found that cosinus theta for a weak Pauling field value is as this expression, and for a field which is lower than 300 kilovolt per centimeter, which is found for most cases. So there is a lot of theoretical and also experimental results about what happens for higher field, but it should be out of the purpose of this talk. But if you are interested, I can tell you that when using higher field, we can, it will involve nonlinearities which are not only dipolar but also octupolar. But that's another story. So in that case, we can calculate from all this consideration of distribution, we can calculate I2, which is proportional to the square, to the average of a cosinus 2 theta. Keep in mind this relation. We will find it again in optical Pauling. And then developing this expression, it can be found that the first non-zero term of the development is mu E over 5 kt. You have to take into account a local field factor. And beta, which is intervenes here, beta is considered as a one-dimensional beta, a diagonal term along this dipole moment axis. The result is that in this kind of structure, we have two different Cartesian components of Chi2, one being parallel to the Pauling axis, which is the biggest one, and one perpendicular to this axis, which is 3 times smaller. The result is that the material is strongly anisotropic, not only for linear optics, but also and much more for nonlinear electro-optic response, the nonlinear response being 3 times higher along the Pauling field. So we can summarize, we can have give a more compact description of this process by using pure the tensor decomposition of beta, and we consider only the dipolar part of beta in the approximation of low Pauling fields. And as previously mentioned, then the anisotropy is quite high. So that looks a solution, but keep in mind that at room temperatures, the orientational order is relatively low, it's less than a few percent. So, of course, we have found in the first part this morning that we can have very efficient nonlinear molecules, and which can compensate the fact that we have to work in a dilute medium because molecules are put in polymer matrix at a relatively low concentration, and it also compensates the fact that the orientation rate is relatively low. But these problems are not solved yet. because when you have a strongly nonlinear molecules, they display high dipole moment, and in spite of application of the electric field, they show a centrosymmetric aggregation tendency, especially when increasing the concentration. So you have a set of various molecules, don't care about the structure, but these molecules are quite different, have quite different nonlinear response. The weakest between this dispersed red one. And here people have plotted the electro-optic coefficient as arbitrary units as a function of a chromophore concentration. It's percentage, mass concentration. You can see here that using a very low, relatively low efficiency molecule, that's dispersed red one in red, the electro-optic coefficient increase almost linearly to up to 30% of concentration. And then you have regular increase. But by taking much more efficient molecules, this one, ISX is this one, in green, these molecules is almost 50 times more efficient than dispersed red one. And we found the problem that after 10%, the response is maximum and even decreases when increasing the concentration. Because for highly concentrated systems, molecules are too close to each other and asymmetric dipolar coupling dominates. And it's still worse when having a mu beta factor, which is 10 times higher, much higher. And in that case, the maximum is found only for 5%. So this is a problem because what we have gained with increasing the mu beta is lost, partially lost, by the fact that you cannot use concentrations higher than a few percent. And this is really frustrating for people, for chemists having done a lot of beautiful molecules, for physicists having measured huge mu beta, and then we are blocked by this reduction of concentration, which completely compensates the gain in a nonlinear response. And we shall see that it's really a real problem, even if chemists have tried to find some solutions. What kind of solution? The point would be, if molecules have a tendency to associate and to come too close to each other, let's find a way to limit their, to separate molecules from each other by putting bulky group, which kind of beginning of dendrimers, between the strong dipolar chain. So I'm sorry, the center in green is not very visible, but you can believe me that it's still a conjugated path. And this is a strong nonlinear intramolecular charge transfer, strong mu beta, so a very efficient system. But if you don't put such kind of bulky groups, you have seen previously that you have this problem with maximum TCQ here. That's this one, for example, and you have this problem. So another point is also, but this is additional information. People have made also replace hydrogen by fluorine atoms. This is a way to increase the transparency in the infrared. But the dendritic structure here limits dipole-dipole interactions between chromophores. So there are some more general strategies. People try to put more dendrimers in as a substituent of the molecule, or try also to make really three-dimensional dendrimers containing nonlinear units, or making also some polymers with attachment of nonlinear molecules with bulky groups. So the imagination of chemists is very large, and they found a lot of combinations between dendritic studies and the way to attach to each other, or the way to attach them to polymers in order to really minimize these dipole-dipole interactions. But it works. We shall see that they have found a nice result, but it remains relatively limited because there are some mechanical screening, but not so much an electrical screening. So dipole-dipole interactions still remain important. but the results have been found. The other question which is usually raised with organic molecules and in polymers is the question, is your device as stable as lithium niobate or as semiconductor ones? So this is really the idea that polymers are bad quality materials. We have this prejudice in current life because using some polymeric materials to make furniture or to make machines, yes, it happens that they are less stable or less resistant than metal or wood or other materials. But we can see also that polymers have invaded our life since 50 years with a relatively good success. And why not to use polymers for optics too? So the stability has been really a problem. And the first point is the orientational stability. Because the scheme I showed you about polling and then after polling cool down the matrix and the matrix becomes rigid, so molecules will remain quietly in the orientation which was assigned to them. This is not true, especially if molecules are not attached to the polymer. They are still located in some cavities, even in solid state, and because they can feel each other, then they tend to go back to centrosymmetric orientation due to possible rotation of some molecules in their cavities. So a method to improve it is to attach the molecule to the chain, polymer chain, by chemical bond. And because the polymer chain is relatively rigid, then it stabilizes strongly the orientation of molecules. Another possibility is also to increase the rigidity of the system by attaching the molecules to polymer chains with two attachment points, with two different chains. Here, the molecule is attached to one chain. Here, these molecules can be attached to two chains, and this makes the system very rigid, but the reaction of attachment should be done after pooling. So it must, and we have to find a way to heat the matrix, the system, to orient the molecule, and to trigger the reaction of attachment after the orientational step. So it can be thermally if the kinetics of this reaction of attachment is weaker than the kinetics of orientation. It can be also done by a photoactivation of the reaction after orientation. This is named cross-linkable polymers, which are supposed to be the best candidate to have high stability in terms of orientation. So, this is to summarize in a clear way the same, but here you have some examples. So doping is very poor, side chain is better. Cross-linking is still better. Here is cross-linking on two sides of the same molecule on the same chain, but it's possible to cross-link to different chains. And there was also another method is to find different matrices. This matrix here is a very well-known plexiglass or polymethyl methacrylate, which is good transparency and very easy to process. But polyimides are much more rigid. They have a high glass transition temperature, and big expectations were put on this structure, but unfortunately, this is relatively too rigid, and molecules can be oriented, but there is a strange relaxation process after that, and polyimides could not be kept in this scheme. So thermal stabilization was demonstrated. By for different kind of inclusion of nonlinear molecules in the matrix. In case of doped polymer, it's not stable at all. So a grafted polymer or side chain polymers, depending on the nature of the matrix, it can reach up to 150 degrees. And cross-link polymer is being shown to be stable up to 180 or 19 degrees for that. People have also tried another kind of matrix, which is inorganic, made from sol-gel. In fact, it's a matrix which has the same composition of silica as silicon oxide, but it's made from synthesis from water at room temperature, so the matrix is not very dense, contrary to silica glass. And in fact, because it is very porous, molecules can easily relax to centrosymmetric geometries as shown here. So at the final stage, after I've been working on all these possibilities, having made some highly nonlinear molecules, trying to separate them by bulky group in order to avoid dipole-dipole interaction, trying to stabilize by cross-linking. People in the United States have been found to find a very high electro-optic coefficients, very stable, and really stable at telecommunication regulations, which are 85 degrees for hundreds of hours. And they were validated at the industrial level. They try to make relatively large chromophore content, but it can be calculated that on this concentration, a lot of molecules have also an anti-symmetric dipolar alignment. But in spite of it, these performances were good, validated at industrial level. I have shown you at the beginning of the previous talk a picture of electro-optic modulator, properly designed for applications. And, but it didn't lead to wide range commercialization because this would imply a complete change of technology for fabrication. And this device, we will show that this device has very broadband, so they are mostly suitable for long-haul transmissions, long distance, and the market is not so wide at this level, at least up to now. So if we need in the future some very broadband devices that's not only for long distance but also for mid-distance transmission, probably these materials will be very useful to have a very high bit frequency, bit rate processing in the telecommunication systems. So we have focused on dipolar polling under electric field. So we have been able to show that it's possible to have a highly nonlinear materials, but there is some limitations. We have seen the problem of reorientation of molecules. We have also seen the problem of anisotropy, is strongly polarization dependent, and it could be a problem for some device which require a polarization independent response. The Chi2 is uniform and will not phase match. It's not possible to make any phase matching, neither by birefringence nor by quasi-phase matching. And it leaves aside a family of octupoles, and we would like to be able to organize octupoles in polymer matrices. So how to find a relevant orientation method for multipolar macroscopic symmetry? And this has been developed since 15 years by Joseph Zis and Sophie Bracelet, which is known to be multiphotonic polling to control the symmetry. So the idea was to start from initially isotropic distribution and to apply to this distribution of nonlinear molecules simultaneously 2 photons at omega and 1 photon at 2 omega. And we will see in the following that it may induce an acentric distribution in the polymer. So how it works? There are some molecules which can be oriented by 1 photon polarized light. But these molecules can have nonlinear molecules. These molecules display an average dipole, and they have this double bond, nitrogen-nitrogen, which is named azo bond. And this bond has the property to induce, to be able to be excited by light, by visible light. And in this condition, a molecule will change its shape and go from the so-called trans form, where the 2 rings are each side of this double bond, to go to a cis form. This is upon excitation, after excitation to the excited state, the molecule can relax to the cis form here. You change the shape. And you can see that after that, the molecule, this shape, this form is not very stable and can relax spontaneously or upon blue or UV excitation towards a transform. But you can see that relaxation can occur in two ways. This group can go back down and resulting in the same orientation, but this group can also come down and result in another orientation. And this is a process results here in orientation which can be different from the initial one. And it can be found that when applying the polarization, if the molecules are initially parallel to the incident light polarization, they will be transformed into this cis form. If the molecules come back to the initial polarization, it will be re-excited again and continue until the relaxation gives orientation will perpendicular to the polarization. Because in that case, the polarization will have no interaction with the electrons of the molecule, and the average dipole will remain stable. So this is average dipole orientation, but keep in mind that it's not really dipolar. It's the orientation of dipoles, but it's not parallel alignment. Statistically, it's anti-parallel because this is an optical field which oscillates very quickly. So there is no reason to have a really non-centrosymmetric organization at the final stage. At the final stage, you will have a strong optical anisotropy, but it's still centrosymmetric. But this method is currently widely used for various kinds of things. For example, to create some patterns, to create some various kind of geometries, or to make some periodic systems and make gratings and so on. So now we want to find a way to induce orientation which will be non-centrosymmetric. So it will be slightly more complicated. So let's start with a mixture of photoisomerizable molecules. And the point will be to find a way by optical means, by using proper photonic polarization, to excite preferentially molecules oriented towards a given direction. Here I start with the mixture of 4 molecules pointing rather to the top and to upper part, and 4 molecules pointing to the lower part. And if we find a way to excite only molecules pointing upwards, these molecules will undergo isomerization from trans to cis and will relax. What happens? This field, this configuration, which will excite only this molecule in red, has been found to be a right field tensor. You find again these field tensors as developed by Benoit. And these tensors has a property to excite, if we choose properly the polarization, we shall see later on, they excite some, have a polar excitation of molecules pointing upwards. And this right field will excite these molecules, and this molecule will relax, and they go to cis state, and half of the molecule will keep the same orientation upwards, and half of them will relax downwards. As a result, you have more molecules pointing downwards than upwards, and you have a non-centrosymmetric organization here. This is named the angular hole burning because we really select molecules as a function of their angular distribution. So this process is always the same, cis-trans organization, but here the fact that we have excited only these molecules is due to the fact that excitation is performed simultaneously by one photon transition and 2-photon transition. And this is absolutely necessary to be able to excite only this set of molecules. It can be shown that we may have different schemes and probability of excitation. If we start with only 2-photon excitation, we have not 2 omega. It can be shown that the excitation probability is proportional to cosinus 4 to 4 theta, where theta is the average angle between average orientation of the polarization and the molecular axis. And this distribution corresponds to a centrosymmetric distribution. If you make the average of cosinus to 4, averaging of all possible orientations, you have a centrosymmetric system. If we use a single photon 2 omega, we have seen before, that's the case of the first slide I showed you of the topic, the probability is cosinus 2 theta, and the averaging, you get centrosymmetric pattern. But exciting both in this case, simultaneous 1 and 2 photon, it can be shown that the probability is cosinus 2, 3, and this is odd exponent of cosinus, and it can be shown that the result is a non-centrosymmetric organization. So there is other ways to describe this. And for example, this you can write here as the probability of excitation. If 1 photon, for example, at 2 omega, because this must be resonant, is proportional to a term which is homogeneous to a linear polarizability, imaginary part. If you have only 2-photon excitation, the probability is this is a cis-field tensor, and is proportional to a term which is homogeneous to a gamma. So this corresponds to even order of the field tensor, 2-rank or 4-rank field tensor. And in the last case, so the simultaneous 1 and 2 photon, the transition probability is found to be homogeneous to the beta term, and this is the 3rd-rank field tensor, which induces a non-centrosymmetric arrangement, organization. So the complete term contains, in fact, 3 contributions. A contribution which will depend on the beta of the molecules included in the material. You have some example here. These terms corresponding to the symmetry of the field tensor, combination of different fields, can be linearly polarized, can be circularly or elliptically polarized. And this is a phase factor. You have a dephasing term here. And we shall see some steps of this process. So that's only to repeat, because it's as a relatively complicated process, it's better to have different views, but it's the same. But here you can see how this rotation of molecules will be really fully involved in the process. 1 photon, 2 photon, and simultaneous 1 and 2 photon. And you can see this tensor. I think that after you will be convinced on the relevance of this orientation process. Once again, and really keep in mind that each step, you have the centrosymmetric orientation here, and non-centrosymmetric cosinus, some even exponent of cosinus and odd components of cosinus. So now let's go to the other aspect, is the fact that all optical orientation will be able either to make you can make some gratings, and anyway, the chi2 is not homogeneous, it's not homogeneous in space. These terms corresponds to kind of cosine variation with the phase difference between omega and 2 omega phase factor. And it means that the chi2, which will be imprinted in the material, is expected to be periodic. And it could be very interesting if you want to perform, for example, quasi-phase matching. So I'll show you what happens practically when you have a right configuration with 2 linear polarization at omega and 2 omega, taking them parallel to each other. I'm sorry, the contrast is not very good, but you can see that with this periodic factor, in fact, the result is that you have a periodic polar orientation of molecules. And if we keep here the same plane for polarization, the molecules will be alternatively polarized positively and negatively with a given period, which will can correspond to possibility of a quasi-phase matching operation. And you can see that the dipolar symmetry is kept over the whole propagation length. It's possible also to make some octupolar configuration. In fact, it will be octupolar, but we'll show it, by using some circular polarization with contracircular polarization. Then we induce, if we consider these molecules will be oriented as a spiral along the propagation axis. And in this case, the spiral geometry is maybe chiral first, and second, it will be completely anisotropic. So, but I must admit that here I am a little bit optimistic. I am telling you some big lies, not because this is not relevant, it's perfectly relevant, but in practice, the problem will be that the process is resonant. You have seen several times in my transparencies that you have to have the excited state of after simultaneous omega and 2 omega excitation must be very close. That's to this level should be very close to a real resonant level here. And if it's not close, that photoisomerization will not occur, and then optical polling cannot be performed. So if you are too far, if this energy is too far from the excited state responsible for isomerization, then there is no polling. And it means that the medium is strongly absorbing, and that such kind of periodicity, because the coherence length will be a few microns typically, or maybe a fraction, but not. And this periodic structure, in practice, is difficult to observe over a length larger than 1 or 2 microns. This is the main problem. So we have to find some other tricks to overcome this point. So optical polling can be made very simply by mixing some omega and 2 omega beams. Usually the intensity as 2 omega must not be too high. It's only a small intensity is required for performing the photoisomerization. And this we can have to control the polarization state by using proper polarizer. And the writing step is only done by either using the same wavelengths as used for writing, or you can use some other wavelengths from EOPO, for example, to obtain second harmonic signal. And of course, polarization analysis is very important. So to summarize in this scheme, we can consider that we can pole dipolar molecules, but we can also orient octupolar molecules. How it works? Because if taking a molecule which is two-dimensional, multipolar, the beta tensor can be the sum of a dipolar and octupolar irreducible part. And this dipolar symmetry is reflected in the symmetry of this tensor, that's a field tensor. And a perfectly dipolar field tensor is found when coupling coupling the 3 fields at omega and 2 omega, rotating in the same with a co-rotating system, with the same circular polarization. And this results in the perfectly dipolar field tensor. But when taking the opposite, taking contracircular polarization between omega and 2 omega will result in an octupolar field. As this result, then this field will act on the dipolar part, this field on the octupolar part. But we can use some elliptical field and find a combination of both. And this will be a way to control, finally, the balance between the dipolar and octupolar contributions to the beta tensor, the chi2, and really to design the symmetry of chi2 to really control the part of dipolar and octupolar contribution to this chi2. So that has been found for an octupolar molecule. And when taking some perpendicular polar linear polarization, you have a pattern of second harmonic generation, which has a figure which can be predicted, but not special. It's relatively isotropic, but not fully isotropic. But if we take the purely octupolar Writing field, here, then we have a perfectly anisotropic response of the material. And this is, of course, isotropic only in plane because this molecule is planar. But the polarization independence can be interesting if we could make later on some materials for other applications. So this is really the signature of the octupolar response. So to summarize, we can have some either purely polar configuration with co-circular Writing fields, and we can have purely octupolar configuration with a contracircular circular field. So, and it can be generalized to any kind of orientation for any kind of order. So this is some writing chi2 in terms of association of polarizabilities with the Pauling field tensors. And then and you will find some various kind of orientation schemes. So, for example, only axial scale when working with two photons only, one photon only, and having playing only on a linear polarizability. And you may have asymmetric, non-centrosymmetric geometry when playing on G equal 1 or G equal 3. G equal 1 will be vector, Pauling field tensor is only a vector, but for G equal 3 is a 3-rank tensor, and so on. So we can play on this. Play this game on any arbitrary J components of the tensors. You can play also on cubic nonlinear hyperpolarizability if you want. It's very general. So we have been able to go from molecular engineering, that's orientation, so finding a way to orient, to fabricate molecules and to orient by external electric field, and to go to photonic engineering, where photons are used to control, to make a chi2, to induce a chi2 of the material, not only to induce a chi2, but to control very finely its tensorial components. So it's much more powerful than the dipolar coupling with an electric field, because electric field will impose a single symmetry. Here you can choose a symmetry at will. And this is monitoring on symmetry, but also of the space distribution of the amplitude with the periodic system, and then to control nonlinear propagation properties. Okay, this is also an illustration of what can be done in terms of periodic orientation and control of symmetry here. So to summarize all this part between dipole and octupole, sorry, I have a problem. The dipolar schemes, we have been able at the molecular level to make dipolar systems and working based on a two-level quantum dispersion model for beta values. So it's beta here. Solution measurements have been used using a Pauling field, providing the scalar product between the dipole moment and the dipolar part of the tensor. And for Guest-Ross film Pauling, using electro-optic polymers by Pauling close to the glass transition temperature, and to use pattern electron technology to obtain a mainly dipolar Chi2 which is uniform. So multipolar scale, we have found possibility to make octupolar or multipolar molecules. Sorry, that you can see here the octupolar beta. And on solution measurements, we have used harmonic line scattering, which provides both norms of dipolar and octupolar terms. And all optical pooling is a multiphoton absorption process, which allows to have a fine control of contribution of dipolar and octupolar origin of Chi2. So we can see that the multipolar scheme is much richer and more liable to have well-controlled materials at macroscopic scale. So polarization should be, perspective should be possibility to make polarization independent waveguides or to make quasi-phase match. But as I told you, there is a problem of absorption and also some other parts of orientation, such as nonlinear polymer-based microcavities, where we can control, we can induce an in-plane non-centrosymmetry in the plane of the cavity, which is much easier to get some results. So I would like to finish this part with a photopatterning process using nonlinear polymers. So it's possible to make some periodic gratings on the surface. In that case, we have not the problem of propagation. So these gratings can be 1 or 2 dimensional. So it's possible to have these gratings. And it's also possible to write some any kind of patterns. And this is also possible to make some pixels. So that's not very complicated. That's came some pixels based on optical pooling. You mix omega into omega beams, and you can, by reading step, you can find a very clear second harmonic signal from 1 pixel. So resolution is improved in this period, and you can have some resolution limited by diffractions, diffraction limited resolution. There is also possibility to make some nonlinear holography with inscription of different pixels. And the interest is that these pixels can be, the response can be very sensitive to orientation. So it's possible to write pixels, so dipolar ones to start, with a different average orientation of molecules in each of them. For this one, the orientation is vertical, this is this direction, this is horizontal, this is like that. And after, when rotating the reading polarization here, then starting with this orientation will mainly highlight the object which is parallel, and so the one will be less visible. And then by rotating the polarization, you can switch on and switch off the pixels corresponding to the proper polarization. And this is a way to make some special encoding of a sample. We can write some information on these thin films, and we have a special way to read them, because it's not so obvious to have a proper reading with second harmonic generation. So it's a way to make some information storage in this system. Okay, so I would like to ask a question. Should I continue with a device, or we can continue? Okay, that will not be long, and then we stay a few minutes for questions. Okay, so device for optical communications. I will come back to relatively non-sophisticated orientation methods. That will be a dipolar pooling. So, but I will show you how to make some polymer-based or even lithium niobate-based optical electro-optic devices, and how to insert in what is electro-optic modulation. Is a way to insert information in an optical on the wave propagated by an optical fiber. It's not the optical fiber itself, of course. And we have a source with a signal, and we want that's a continuous signal here, and we want to imprint the information coming from an electrical signal. It can come from your computer. And to imprint this information, you can change the phase of or amplitude of the source if the modulator displays nonlinear response. Quadratic nonlinear response would be the electro-optic coefficient. So you change the phase, the electrical signal will change the phase, and will change the shape of the signal, outcoming signal. So the change of the carrier wave can be performed either by electroabsorption, by semiconductors, or change of refractive index, a real part. And this is mainly obtained with the electric materials, such as lithium diobates and polymers. The most popular device is amplitude modulator. We will see in the following small details about phase modulators, but the most popular is the amplitude modulator because it works without requiring to put additional polarizers, and it's a classical interferometer which transforms two waves with dephasing, with a different phase, with a signal which amplitude is modified. So in fact, the carrier wave is sent over there, split in two parts. The first part is not submitted to, it's a centrosymmetric waveguide, which is linear. And the other arms has been electrically poled via the procedure I described before. And this electrode can be used either as a polling electrode or also operating electrode, because this electrode will transmit the electrical signal, change the phase, and by interference transforms this dephasing into a change of intensity. So I think you have heard a lot about these definitions about electro-optic coefficients. It's related to change of refractive index. This is equivalent to sum or frequency mixing, but one frequency is a quasi-static electric field. We have to define a proper operating voltage, which is the voltage which induces a dephasing factor of pi between in the system, and this related to the length of the device. The separation between electrode is denominator, and this also no, this is the length of the device. This is separation of modulator, and this is electro-optic coefficient. So that's in that case we have. For the phase modulator is placed between polarizers, and if we have no electric field, there is no polarization change. If we apply an electric field, the polarization will rotate, and this will induce a change of the transmission factor. So the two possibilities of modulators: the phase modulator, one single arm, one set of electrodes, but you must use some cross polarizers, or Mach-Zehnder modulator with two waveguides and no polarizers, because the operation is made by interference in the arms, between the arms. So let's have some examples. Potassium niobate is really the state of the art. Now modulators are commercial for high bitrate modulation. It's transparent from up to mid-infrared and very low losses, which is interesting. Its main problem could be its photorefractive properties, but they are not so sensitive in the intensity domain and wavelengths used for telecommunication. This is main electro-optic coefficient, but the efficient one is not so high, but high enough to be used for commercial applications. And we shall see that the strip waveguides are made by diffusion of titan, but it's a monolithic technology, so it's difficult to integrate on other device directly. The material is anisotropic. And the state of the art are modulators at 40 gigabits per second. So how to make these waveguides? In fact, the point is that you have to start from the bulk device and define the waveguide by putting a resin mask, which will hide the part. Then deposit titanium everywhere, but we can remove some part of titanium by removing the resin, by using a solvent which will eliminate the resin. So titanium is kept only on this domain. And upon heating, titanium atoms will diffuse inside the material, and usually the diffusion is limited. And after cooling, titanium atoms will not move anymore, and then only this small part will display a higher refractive index than the surrounding and result in a strong confinement. Then it's possible to make a device by putting some electrodes, but you can see that electrodes can be put only on a lateral configuration. The electric field for electro-optic modulation is only horizontal. It's not possible to put electrodes along the vertical direction because this is a monolithic method and it's difficult to position some electrodes very close to the waveguide itself. So for polymer electro-optic modulator, that's a phase modulator here, one waveguide between cross polarizer, and the half-wave voltage corresponding to the pi dephasing factor is given by this relation. And you can see here that this depends on the difference between the diagonal electro-optic coefficient, the non-diagonal one, because the material is isotropic, and this one is usually 1/3 of this one. This is the length of the part of the electro-optic part. This is the distance between electrode. This is the geometrical factor and refractive index. You can see that for polymers, the interest of the main interest will be the high electro-optic value of these terms, because refractive indices are relatively low as compared to other materials. So low refractive index are not really in favor of a low V-pi, but this nonlinear response will strongly help. So this is a polling procedure. You have seen it before, but it's only to show how it works. With first heating, then polling, and keep the electric field upon cooling. That's relatively simple. So sorry, that's equations, but they are relatively easy. That's how to calculate the response from the intensity modulation using a phase modulator. So the phase modulator is transformed into an intensity modulator by placing it between two cross polarizers. So you can express at the input the two orthogonal components of the incident field. At the output, after applying V-pi, then you have introduced an additional dephasing factor, and you calculate at the output after the second polarizer the intensity, and it's expressed as this. You have this kind of expression, and you define this V-pi as this term. So how to reduce the operating voltage? This because it's the main problem. And for if we have a Mach-Zehnder modulator with only one arm made of an electro-optic material, this is the famous value of V-pi, already mentioned in the previous slides. But there is some tricks to make performance much better. If we can make some alternate polling. For example, here we make polling with polar molecules pointing upwards, and the other arm you can poll with opposite polling field, molecules pointing backwards. In that case, the dephasing factor will add to each other because the chi2 have opposite signs. And then the dephasing between the two arms is 2 times higher, and then the V-pi will be divided by 2 as compared to the case of one arm with a system with only one arm. So that's important because you reduce by a factor of 2 the operating voltage. And okay, so let me show quickly how to make these waveguides. That's a classical photolithographic and etching methods. You start by making various, you have to make multiple layer systems. That's a lower electrode. This is the lowest buffer linear polymer layer. This is a nonlinear layer. And this is the photoresist, which can be structured by UV light to make some patterns which will be precursor of the waveguide. So this is the case here. After development of photoresist, you have these two resists above this part, and etching can remove all the material except the part which is below the protecting resin. And this is so-called reactive ionic etching, which is used for such kind of systems. This method is used because it creates a structure which are with vertical walls, which is important for modelization of waveguide. Then it's possible to remove the photoresist, then to put some upper layer for confinement, and deposit electrodes at the end. So this is a system when you can see that the electrodes can be deposited at the vertical, so that to exert a vertical electric field as compared to lithium niobate, where only horizontal fields could be used for polling or operation. So that is an additional factor of freedom. So that's other possibility is to make waveguides which are not completely, which are only one small part above the general layers. That's a kind of a waveguide, but it's the same principle here, and so different materials, but it's the same system. Okay, that's how does it work. For example, in the case of phase modulators, as an example, this is a periodic applied electric field, and this is the optical response obtained from the photodiodes. So don't be afraid about the fact that it's difficult to find the real point where there is no slight depart from the maximum. So in fact, this is a periodic response, but usually the detection is found slightly above the real V pi. But the Pauling field, you see the values, is 100 volts per micrometers with electrodes, relatively long waveguide and electrodes. And the half-wave voltage is a few volts, which is relatively correct. We need to reduce the half-wave voltage because if we want to perform some high-frequency gigahertz operation, it's necessary to have low voltage. So for the other Mach Zehnder with the two-poled arms, then the performance are much better because the half-wave voltage, which was found 3.5, is reduced down to 2.6 volts. And this makes it compatible with operation in the high-frequency regime here. So there is another trick is to increase the propagation length by making some loops. So in fact, this with opposite polling for each part of the loops, and this we reduce the V pi by a factor of 4 with respect to a device with only one poled arm. And in fact, the main problem of this is that it induces some losses because of the curvature of the loop and because you increase the interaction length. And in fact, the results are not so good. This is a way to characterize modulators. You start from a tunable laser source, usually 1.5. Then you have to control finely the polarization. And depending on what you want, then you use one or two waveguides and characterize the output signal by photodiodes. And this is an example of, we have to check first the fact that the light is wave-guided on the single mode. It's a single mode. And of course, it will also be controlled by the dimension of the waveguides. Propagation losses are measured by so-called cutback method. It's a relatively Barbarian system. When you make some waveguide and you cut the waveguide at different lengths and to measure the losses at the output. And it's also necessary to find insertion losses. So there is a relatively lossy medium, but in spite of it, it's suitable for electro-optic operation. This is for the loop system, a long structure, push-pull system, and the voltage is not really strongly reduced because probably this is not fully optimized, and you have some losses. Okay, but the interest of electro-optic polymers is that to meet the bandwidth challenge. For material response, to have a wide bandwidth, we must have purely electronic nonlinearities, and we must have phase matching between radio frequency waves, which are sent onto the device, and optical waves. And this is found when there is a weak frequency dispersion of the dielectric constant between the optical and radio frequencies. And this is not the case for lithium niobate, because epsilon is large for low frequency and small for optical ones. In the polymer, these epsilon values are almost the same, because in lithium niobate you have some other contribution, non-electronic contribution to the nonlinear response. Polymers are purely electronic, because it's molecular assembly with a poor, very weak interaction between molecules, and this purely electronic system. So, and this phase matching allows for very wide bandwidth operation, and people have found a bandwidth which is higher than 300 gigahertz for polymers. So it gives us a lot of possibilities to develop a device with a very high processing rate for signal, and probably in the future, when needing more and more information rate transfer, that could be really the solution. And then to compare between various kinds of electro-optic devices, these operating voltage are relatively similar, but for polymers, it has been possible to show that operating voltage are lower than 1 volt. The wavelength dependence is important also, because we need to adjust to small wavelength changes, and is weak for all for oxide and for polymers. The stability is good for inorganic and medium good for organics, but as we have seen before, it has been possible to really make the material very stable at operational temperature. So now it's almost meeting the requirements for lithium niobate. So size can be slightly smaller because of this small voltage, and the really important point is the bandwidth, which is really huge, and so it's 40 gigahertz now, but it's for 300. And losses are remaining relatively large as compared to lithium niobate. So you can see here that the polymer will really be the only solution when more information transfer is needed at a very high bit rate. So we have seen that it's possible to obtain a very good voltage and very good result, even with relatively low profile and commercial materials. Because the result I showed here before, especially 1 volt operation, was found for these sophisticated molecules I have shown this morning, with a system with low bond alternation properties, but these molecules are difficult to fabricate, they are not commercial, and they have also small problem of not orientational but thermal stability. Using commercial molecules will ensure a relatively good thermal stability, and with performance which are similar or even better than for lithium niobate. And this is really possible to make relatively cheap components, and not only by optimizing the material, but also the device architecture. So, in fact, as a conclusion, molecular engineering has been a big achievement, and is still a big activity to optimize the nonlinear optical response of materials. But don't forget that if you have the best material of the world, if you don't know how to make devices, you will not obtain anything. We had a problem in the French community. There was a group who gained a big contract. They were very champions in molecular engineering, but they didn't know anything about device, and the project failed. So it's important to keep that. That's not only chemical or physical science which can lead to real application, but device engineering is really a very important part of the solution. Okay, I stop here, and thank you for having listened to me. In fact, that's a relatively wide choice of molecules and materials. So if you have some questions, please ask.